हरि जय गोपीजन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीजन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रजजन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रजजन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारि यमुना तीरा वनचारि जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीजन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीजन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रजजन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रजजन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारि यमुना तीरा वनचारि जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा शील प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा शील प्रभुपादा एवं कृष्णपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक श्री प्रभुपाद की जय इस्कॉन संस्थापक श्री प्रभुपाद की जय एवं कृष्णपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक सदस्य श्री भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय एवं विष्णुपाद किशोरदास बाबू महाराज की जय एवं विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद श्री भक्तिविनोद ठाकुर की जय एवं विष्णुपाद वैष्णव सर्ववंशी जगन्नाथ दास बाबू महाराज की जय जय श्री रूप सनातन भट्टरगण श्री जी गोपाल भट्टदास षट गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय नमाचार्य श्री हरदास ठाकुर की जय प्रेम से गौर शिक्षण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड की गोवर्धन की जय श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोर ईश्वर भगवान की जय शिमायपुर धाम की जय, शिवृंदावन धाम की जय, गंगा माई की जय, यमुना माई की जय, भक्ति देवी की जय, तुलसी देवी की जय, अनंतपुरी वैष्णव की जय, श्री हरनाम संकीर्तन की जय, ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, ISKCON वर्तमान गुरुवृंद की जय, समावेद भक्तवृंद की जय, गौरव प्रेमानंद देव, all glories to the assembled ones, all glories to the assembled ones, all glories to the assembled ones, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprayeshu Patreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Tamasloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishti. Hare Krishna. Welcome down to the Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we'll be discussing from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26, text 62 to 71, because most of them don't have any purport. So I'll start from text 62. Ete hi abhyuttita deva naiva shyotapane shakhan punar avivishu kanhi tam uttapaitum krama. Translation Srila Prabhupada. When the demigods and the presiding deities of the various senses were thus manifested, they wanted to wake their origin of appearance. But on failing to do so, they re-entered the body of the Virat Purusha, one after another, in order to wake him. In order to wake the sleeping deity, controller within, one has to rechannel the sense activities from concentration on the outside to concentration inside. In the following verses, the sense activities which are required to wake the Virat Purusha will be explained very nicely. Text 63. Vahnir vacha mukam beje nodatishtat tada virat granena nasike vajur nodatishtat tada virat. Or translation should go for the. The god of fire entered his mouth with the organ of speech, but the Virat Purusha could not be aroused. Then the god of wind entered his nostrils with a sense of smell, but still the Virat Purusha refused to be awakened. Text 64. Akshini chakshudai dityo no noratishta tadabhirat srotre nakarnau chadisho nodatishta tadabhirat. Translation is about 40. The sun god entered the eyes of the Virat Purusha with a sense of sight, but still the Virat Purusha did not get up. Similarly, the predominating deities of the directions entered through his ears with a sense of hearing, but still he did not get up. Text 65. Pracham romabir oshadyo nodatishta tadabhirat retasa shishnam apastu nodatishta tadabhirat. Translation Srila Prabhupada. The predominating deities of the skin, herbs, and seasoning plants entered the skin of the Virat Purusha with the hair of the body, but the cosmic being refused to get up even then. The god predominating over water entered his organ of generation with the faculty of procreation, but the Virat Purusha still would not rise. Text 66. Gudam mrityur apanenha nodatishta tadabhirat hastab indro bale naibha nodatishta tadabhirat. Translation Srila Prabhupada. The god of death entered his anus with the organ of defecation, but the Virat Purusha could not be spurred to activity. The god Indra entered the hands with the power of grasping and dropping things, but the Virat Purusha would not get up even then. Text 67. Vishnu datyaiva charanau nodatishtat tadabhirat nadir nadyo lohitenha nodatishtat tadabhirat. Translation Srila Prabhupada. Lord Vishnu entered his feet with the faculty of locomotion, but the Virat Purusha refused to stand up even then. The rivers entered his blood vessels with the blood and the power of circulation, but still the cosmic being could not be made to stir. Text 68. Kshitribhyam udaram sindhur nodatishta tadabhirat hridayam manasat chandro nodatishta tadabhirat. Translation Srila Prabhupada. The ocean entered his abdomen with hunger and thirst, but the cosmic being refused to rise even then. The moon god entered his heart with the mind, but the cosmic being would not be roused. Text 69. Buddhya brahma hridayam Nodatishta tada virhat, Rudro bimatya hridayam, Nodatishta tada virhat. Translation of what we Brahma also entered his heart with intelligence, but even then the cosmic being could not be prevailed upon to get up. Lord Rudra then entered his heart with the ego, but even then the cosmic being did not stir. Text 70. Chittena hridayam chaityaha kshetrajna prabhishatyadha virat tadaiva purushaha salilad udhishtadha. Translation. However, when the inner controller, the deity presiding over consciousness, entered the heart with reason, at that very moment, the cosmic being arose from the causal waters. Text 71. Yata prashuptam purusham pranene indriya manotyaha prabhavanti vinayenha nota paitum ojasa. Yata prasuptam purusham pranendriya manotyaha prabhavanti vina yenha notapaitum ojasa. Yata prasuptam purusham pranenendriya manodhyaha prabhavanti vinayenha notapaitum ojasa. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. When a man is sleeping, all his material assets, namely the vital energy, the senses for recording knowledge, the senses for working, the mind and the intelligence cannot arouse him. He can be aroused only when the super soul helps him. The explanation of Sankhya philosophy is described here in detail in the sense that the Virat Purusha, or the universal form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the original source of all the various sense organs and their presiding deities. The relationship between the Virat Purusha and the presiding deities or the living entities is so intricate that simply by exercising the sense organs which are related to the presiding deities, the Virat Purusha cannot be aroused. It is not possible to arouse the Virat Purusha or to link with the Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead by material activities. Only by devotional service and detachment can one perform the process of linking with the Absolute. Om Jnana Jnananjana Shalakya Chaturithridam Mena Tatmani Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam in Bhutale Swayam Rupakada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Vidapadakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Satkirjatam Sarvana Rekanat Anditam Tamsijivam Sadvaitam Sabhutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sarvana Lalita Shri Vishakandhitamscha Ye Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Taptagan Chanakaudanti Radhe Vindavneshwari Vishvanushte Pramami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarupesha Kapasnitu Devesha Paddaram Pavneke Krishna Vipuna Manvaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Moham Karu Devachalam Bhangam Nagede Kapatam Moham Shri Gurundayantanam Paramandamatam Shri Chaitanya Vishwaram. Hare Krishna. So here in these verses and verse number 71, there is a mention of how there is a relationship between the universal form of the Lord, that is the Virat Purusha, the preceding deities and the living entities exercising the sense organs. And when we say presiding deities, these are the demigods or the deities who are in charge of various affairs of this material manifestation. For example, every part of our body is governed by one demigod, which is mentioned in each of the verses. Some of them we will go through that today, so that we have an understanding how our body works, how the Virat Purusha, the universal form of the Lord, from whom everything originates, and this Virat Purusha, or the universal form, is actually a manifestation for this material world of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. And the cause of all this is none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form as the Super Soul, because the Super Soul is present in every living atom, in every matter, And in every living entity, that includes even the demigods, who are the preceding deities of these senses. So we will go through them one by one. Now, these demigods are none other than, it is like ministers' posts. Like in a cabinet, we have a minister for economy, minister for uh, uh, administration, minister for education, minister for finance. So many ministries are there, and they are all posts. So what happens once in 5 years, some election takes place, and somebody who is qualified, so-called to be qualified, supposed to be qualified, takes up the post and manages the administration. Similarly, in the management of these universal affairs, what happens is that there are 33 crore demigods, which is mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, and they are all in charge of so many affairs in this material manifestation. And each one of them are in charge of one particular field. For example, in the case of ours, someone is in charge of the brain, someone is in charge of the hands and legs, someone is in charge of the heart, someone in charge of the other parts of the body, and so forth. There are so many demigods, and the others who manage the other affairs in the universe. So all of these are also posts, and one who is qualified, when we say qualified, like I have mentioned in the previous classes, someone may be performing devotional service, but at the same time, maybe having a lot of desire for fruitive results. To such personalities, the Lord arranges for them to take birth as demigods. And these demigods are living entities on a much higher platform than us. They are empowered by the Lord to manage the administrative affairs, and they stay there for a certain period of time until the results of their pious activities are over. When we say pious activities, it is not only pious activities. One way of looking at pious activities is giving in charity, opening schools, hospitals, etc. The other way of looking at it is that many perform devotional service with a lot of material desires. So the Lord arranges them to be given a better post, so they become demigods. And they remain in that position until the time the results of their pious activities are over. Once the results are over, they come back to this earthly planet. And it is all not just when one performs the pious activities, one becomes a demigod. At the same time, if one performs sinful activities, he is liable to be punished and sent to hellish planets also. And when one goes to hellish planets, he has to suffer a lot, where the living conditions are very, very abominable. And those in charge of the hellish planets, they stay there. The residents also stay there in those hellish planets until the time the results of impious activities are over, and they come back to this earthly planet to start their work again. So that is why it is said that this human form of life is like a junction box where one can decide whether to stay here or to go to higher planetary systems where the demigods live on a very opulent atmosphere, or to go to hellish planets. Now, if you see, even in a city like Bombay or Bangalore, there may be some areas which are dominated by very poor or very middle class, low class families with low income and all. At the same time, there may be very luxurious posh colonies where very rich, affluent people live, where the part of the city might be very clean, the amenities may be very good, so things like that. So the heavenly planets are some like the ones, like these posh ones, where they have a very opulent environment, and there is a lot of opportunity for heavenly pleasures, heavenly opulence. But one cannot remain there for a long time, that is one thing. And at the same time, one is also accountable. It is not that just because they have become a demigod, they are independent of the Supreme Lord. They are also empowered by the Supreme Lord to manage their affairs. And if they deviate from the religious principles anytime, immediately their position is lost. So that is why it is said that there are 33 million demigods managing the universal affairs. And there also, it is not that whatever we are not free from, they are free from. They are also, they take birth, they also die. Their way of dying is different because their it's a moment of death. They don't know when it will happen, but it's a moment without suffering. There also old age is there, but old age is there, and disease is also there. So no material world in anywhere, this material universe is free from these four principles, that is birth, death, old age, and disease. At the same time, they have a very opulent this thing, and they are all empowered. So these demigods, they are empowered representatives of the Lord only, and they are empowered by the Lord for a particular mission. But the comparison is given that in a prison house, there are some old prisoners who are given responsibility for prison management. For prison management, there may be some old ones, prisoners who might have refined, and they might have been given these responsibilities. And there are always new prisoners that are coming to the prison house, like us. So these demigods are devotees of the Lord. And when they become completely free from material desires, even in their responsibilities, then they are also given an opportunity to go to higher planets or a spiritual world by performance of devotional service. But generally, it is not easy because when somebody lives in a very opulent environment or opulent atmosphere, they don't take up to devotional service to the Lord very easily. So there are every possibility of even demigods not going to the spiritual planets from there. There is a possibility, mostly generally they come down to the earthly planet. So these devatas are like controllers of the material world. For example, it is said that the sun is the demigod for the eyes. He controls the eyes and the eyesight. Then the Dig devatas for the ears, Vayu for the skin, Ashwini Kumara for the nose, Varuna for the tongue, Indra for the hands, Agni for the voice, etc. So these are different types of Prajapati for the genitals. So these are all different types of demigods who manage the universal affairs, and their responsibility is the management of the sense organs of each and every living entity. Now, one can become, it is said in the Shastra that one can become sun god, or even one can get the position of Brahma by performance of fruitive activities or devotional service mixed with material enjoyment. But even in this, there is no one is independent of the Supreme Lord. As Brahma prays in his Brahma Samhita, Yachakshuresa Savita Sagat Grahana Raja Samasta Suramutir Ashesha Tejaha Yasyajnaya Pramati Samprati Chakra Govindamadi Purusham Tamham Bhajami. That means the sun, who is the king of all the planets, he is full of infinite effulgence. The image of a good soul is as good as the eye of this world. And he says that I adore the primeval Lord Govinda, in pursuance of whose order the sun performs his journey mounting the wheel of time. That means the sun god, who is in charge of the sun planet, he is also performing his journey through the wheel of time. And how he performs? In pursuance of that Supreme Lord Govinda. That means even he cannot do anything without the permission of the Supreme Lord. So this is how when sun god, who is in charge of the eyesight. Why I took this example? Because everything happens, we are able to see because of the sunlight. Now one might think that we are able to see in the night without sunlight, but we are having artificial light. But it is said that even these artificial lights have a source. Ultimately, the original source is sun, and the original source of the sun is also the Supreme Lord. So in these verses that I have described today, we have described there are some preceding deities for each sense organs. Then the universal form of the Lord, who also has a sense organ, because the universal form has a sense organ, so we also have a sense organ, and there is a sense object. So we will go through some of these. For example, the god of fire, he entered through the mouth of the universal organ with the organ of speech, but still the universal form of the Lord could not be woken up. So the universal form of the Lord is asleep, as we see in these 8 or 10 verses, and they are all waiting. All these demigods are trying to wake up the universal form. but the Lord does not wake up. I will not go through all of these one by one because I've already read in the translation. Another example is the god of wind entered the nostrils of the universal form with the sense of smell, but the Lord did not wake up. Then there are deities for the skin. We have skins and herbs, and there are deities for seasoning plants. They entered the skin of the Virat Purusha with the hair of the body. But still, the Virat Purusha did not wake up. And then the god predominating over water entered his organ of generation with the faculty of procreation. Then Yamaraj, the god of death, entered the anus of the Virat Purusha with the organ of defecation. Now, if you look at this particular case itself, many may have symptoms of the digestion problems. They may have difficulties in defecation. So this is because Yamaraj is given that particular problem to that particular living entity due to whatever the karma one might have done in his previous life. He's got a human body, but his system, sense organ is not functioning effectively because there is a problem with his karma in his previous life. So like that, all these demigods are functioning very, very effectively and perfectly. They don't make a mistake, because if they make a mistake, they are accountable to the Supreme Lord. And then it is mentioned as to how the moon god entered the heart of the universal form with his mind. So moon god is in charge of the mind. After that, it is mentioned how Brahma also entered his heart with intelligence. So Brahma is also a demigod, and he is empowered with the function of intelligence. And then Rudra entered the heart of the universal form with his ego. So even Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, they are all having these portfolios, and they manage these very effectively, and they are all accountable for this part of the function of the human body. So all these material elements, the senses, mind, intelligence, and all of them are able to function only by the presence of the Supreme Lord. Now, the senses cannot wake up on their own without the presence of the Supreme Lord. For example, even inert matters, you take, for example, salt. Salt has got a distinct taste. Now, salt cannot have that salty taste if the Lord has not given that taste to that particular commodity. So similarly, sugar. So all the material elements that you look at can perform their function only by the presence of this Supreme Lord, whether it is inert matter or matter that is alive. Similarly, the senses. If the Lord wishes, many times we see that somebody might not be able to move the hands or move the legs. This is because the super soul within the heart of the human body does not permit. Only the super soul permits. This super soul is none other than an expansion of the Supreme Lord in this material world. And super soul does not exist in the spiritual world because it is not required. The function of the super soul is to be, he facilitates and he monitors and he fulfills or the desire of a living entity. For example, if a man wants to steal, the super soul within the heart might tell him, don't do that, it's not good for you. But the person who is there, he may not, the human being, he may not listen to that voice who is telling him that is a super soul. Couple of times the super soul might tell him directly through his, but generally it does not happen unless one becomes a devotee of the Lord. But indirectly through others, through law or something, that by stealing, one can be caught and be imprisoned and get punished for that. But still, a person might be very, very adamant and arrogant. Then the super soul facilitates that because he has a desire to enjoy. The super soul then facilitates that by performing that activity and makes him suffer also, so that by suffering, he realizes that he has made a mistake. But many times, this suffering one realizes after many, many occasions. Even many, many birds pass through, but many don't realize. That's why you might see some are very professional criminals, some professional thieves, etc. So this is the facility that the super soul awards to every living entity. And we are all able to perform our functions through the presiding deities of these respective sense organs by the authority of the Supreme Lord. The Lord himself says in Bhagavad Gita 10 chapter 42nd sloka, with a single fragment of myself, I pervade and support this entire universe. Even the universe, so-called universe, which is the smallest of all, there is a super soul in the form of Garbhodaka Sai Vishnu. And the super soul in the heart of all the living entities is called Kshirodaka Sai Vishnu. So the Lord is present everywhere. And the Lord also says in Bhagavad Gita, everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads and faces, and he has ears everywhere. So in this way, the super soul is pervading all through the universe and in every single atom and also in every single sense organ, every single living entity, the Lord is present. Whether it is an ant or a human being or a demigod, the super soul is there. And that super soul is who is watching all our activities. Not only is watching all our activities, even the thought process that is going on in our mind, the super soul is watching and accordingly facilitates our thought process. So sometimes we see there are people who can't even sleep. That is because the super soul does not permit him to sleep. Some people sleep for very long hours together because he has a desire to sleep and the Lord facilitates. So the living entity or whoever it is, they are all dependent on the Supreme Lord's wish based on two things. One is our desire and the second thing is our deserve. We may desire something, but we may not deserve. So the super soul will not award that. So the Lord facilitates everything, even our intelligence, our remembrance, our forgetfulness. Many times, for example, great scholars, if they have achieved something very important, and if somebody asks, how did they achieve that? They'll say, no, all of a sudden some thought came into my mind and I got this idea in my mind and I start working on it and it worked very well. But they don't realize what the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, text 15. He says, Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto mattasmriti jnanam apohanam cha. He says that remembrance, forgetfulness, and knowledge is also given by the super soul. That means whatever knowledge we get, that comes from the Lord. When we forget something, that forgetfulness also comes from the Lord. And when we remember something, that also inspiration is given by the Paramatma or the super soul. So he is a witness and he is also a permitter and he also oversees every aspect of all the living entities. So this is how the Paramatma functions. And here in these verses, we see that the demigods, they accompanied with the respective sense organs and they try to wake up the Virat Purusha, the uniform self form of the Lord when he is asleep. And the Lord is not waking up. But from text 70 onwards, it is said as to how when Vasudeva, or who is the Lord of the Chitta or the consciousness, when he went to wake up, then automatically the Virat Purusha woke up from the causal ocean. So from here we'll go on. And text 71, it is mentioned as to how when a man is sleeping, for example, if somebody is sleeping in a deep sleep, his material things like his energy, his senses for working senses, knowledge acquiring senses, his mind, his intelligence, nothing is functioning. That is not the normal sleep, but somebody is in a deep sleep. Even if you try to wake up a person, he might say, oh, and then he might go back to sleep. This is because he's in a deep sleep. And at that time, the senses don't work. The intelligence, mind, none of them can wake him up because they are all on a dormant stage. But when the super soul inside inspires him to wake up, then he can get up. So similarly, the Virat Purusha was tried to be, all the demigods who are in different charge of different sense organs, they tried to wake up the Virat Purusha, but the Virat Purusha did not wake up. But when the Lord of Consciousness, that is Vasudeva, tried to enter at that moment, the Virat Purusha woke up from the waters. That means without the presence or without the presence of the Supreme Lord, the Lord could not be woken up. So the presence of the Supreme Lord is very important for anyone's success in any situation, in any circumstance, and in any state. So that is why it is said that the super soul of the Virat Purusha could be awakened only by the mercy of the super soul himself. So now, how to connect with the super soul? It is mentioned here. So first, the relationship which is mentioned about the Virat Purusha, the universal form. He is a preceding deity for this material world, and this Virat Purusha is also only for this material world. Then the living entities are mentioned and the connection between the sense organs. So there is a Virat Purusha, there is a preceding deity, and there is a living entity. This is how they are all connected. Now, it is not possible for one to function without the permission of the super soul, who is none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of super soul or Paramatma in this material world. Now, how this super one can connect himself with the super soul is mentioned the last line of the purport. He says that Srila Prabhupada mentions only by devotional service and detachment can one perform the process of linking with the Absolute. So linking with the Absolute, what we have discussed so far before also, is that yoga process, not any artificial exercise, but the process of connecting with devotional service through detachment, one can connect with the Absolute. That is why a normal fruity worker or a karmi or a person who is situated on a material platform may not realize the voice of the super soul who is speaking. The super soul is situated next to the soul within the heart of every living entity. So the example Srila Prabhupada many times gives is that how there are two birds. One is eating the fruit in a tree and one is watching. The one who is eating the fruit in the tree are living entities like us, and the one who is observing is the Paramatma. The other bird is the Paramatma who is watching the activities of the bird who is eating. So the super soul is seeing the fruits of the activities that we are all eating, and he awards the results accordingly. So the same super soul, his voice can be heard when one takes up to the process of devotional service. To the extent, even many times devotees have a lot of realizations. Why these realizations come is because the Lord as the super soul inspires the jiva to understand by purifying his intelligence and his mind, thereby the senses, by which the living entity understands, yes, this is a voice I got from my inner voice that I should do this or I should not do this. So this is a guidance that comes from the Paramatma in our heart. And the more one takes up to the process of devotional service, the more one can understand the voice of the super soul. That is why it is said that when there are surrendered living entities, when the human beings also, or even demigods, who surrender fully to the Supreme Lord, when they are surrendered means they are able to hear the voice of the super soul or the directions of the super soul at every moment of time. So that is why their thoughts, their actions are completely in union with the thoughts of the Supreme Lord. So they never go wrong. They are always perfect because pure devotees of the Lord are perfect in their thoughts and activities because they are fully surrendered to the Lord. When they are surrendered, their intelligence is purified. When the intelligence is purified, then automatically the mind is controlled. When mind is controlled, the senses are also under control. The senses work under the guidance of the Lord for the satisfaction of the senses of the Lord. So we have discussed before, Sarvopadi Vinirmuktam Tatparat Enirman Rishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Ruchite. Rishikesh, the Lord of the one of the names of the Lord is Rishikesha, or master of the senses, because the Lord also has senses, we have senses. So when these senses of us work for the satisfaction of the senses of the Lord, then the Lord becomes pleased and devotional service is guaranteed. So pure devotees of the Lord who are surrendered, their intelligence is purified, their senses, their mind, everything works in union with the desire of the Supreme Lord. They are working only for satisfaction of the senses of the Lord. So their thoughts and actions are perfect. So their activities are like, example is given in the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam about Prithu Maharaj. Prithu Maharaj was none other than an empowered incarnation of the Supreme Lord. So it is said that his activities were perfect because he was an empowered incarnation. All his activities were driven to satisfaction of the desire of the Supreme Lord. So the example is given that sometimes the sun shines on stool, urine, and so many other polluted things. But since the sun is all powerful, it is never affected by the polluted things with which it associates. So we might see many times on the road, stool and urine and all, so many dirty objects might be there. But the sun does not get affected by that. On the other contrary, it is said that sunshine sterilizes and purifies polluted and dirty places. So sunshine purifies all those dirty places also. Similarly, a devotee may engage in so many activities, or a person might engage in so many activities, but because he has no desire for sense gratification, they never affect him. That means one who is surrendered to the Lord, these are the pure devotees of the Lord, they are not affected by any material activities. So we might see devotees might also perform material activities like any other conditioned soul, but they are not affected by the material activities because their desire is to satisfy the Lord. They do everything for the satisfaction of the Lord. So just like the sunshine cleans even dirty places, even the material activities, when they are used in done in the service of the Lord, they have no impurity in them because they are done for the satisfaction of the Lord. So a devotee dovetails all the material activities for the service of the Lord. And since a pure devotee knows how to use everything in the Lord's service, he is never affected by material activities. Rather, by his plans, he purifies, by his presence, he purifies such activities also. So a pure devotee, by his actions, purifies even material activities that he performs because he is situated on that platform. So we will go through some of the important quotes given in the scriptures as to how devotional service brings forth detachment. Detachment is very, very important for one to attain perfection in material life. Attachment. It is only the attachment to anything material that we have, we are bound in this material world. That is why Srila Prabhupada mentions by devotional service and detachment. So when one performs devotional service, automatically one's attachment for all that is material goes off and one starts practicing detachment. So one must have a desire first to please Krishna very sincerely and purely. Then the super soul within the heart facilitates that desire also. So there is a quote from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura that when we open the heart for Krishna, then the Lord takes a very strategic position and gradually takes over us. Just like, when an army invades an opposite party, they take up very strategic points and gradually they attack and take over. Similarly, if we give some room for Krishna, then Krishna will take care of us and he will take strategic positions and he will see that all our material desires are overcome by the process of devotional service, whereby all our unwanted desires are vanquished from our heart. Example is given about Dhruva Maharaj. Dhruva Maharaj went to the forest. He was wanting to have a kingdom much more opulent than his father. But when he saw the Lord himself, by by observing the instructions by his spiritual master. Now, like I mentioned, Narad Muni acted as the spiritual master. Dhruva Maharaj went to the forest, but Narad Muni took up the position as his spiritual master and gave him instructions. And when Dhruva Maharaj observed these instructions in total, then he became like a surrendered soul and he performed austerities. And he performed austerities to such an extent, the entire universe came to a standstill and all the demigods were afraid. Same super soul is there in Dhruva Maharaj's heart and the same super soul in the demigods also. So the Lord made this arrangement to show that the role of a spiritual master is very, very important in a disciple's life. So when an aspiring disciple takes shelter of a spiritual master, observes his instructions, spiritual master is not interested in anything material. he gives instructions only for the progress of his disciples' spiritual life. So when Dhruva Maharaj observed this, he had derived tremendous power. Similarly, if an aspiring disciple takes shelter of a spiritual master and one observes his instructions, one's spiritual life becomes perfect and complete. In fact, there was a quote yesterday, I think, from my spiritual master, Isolna Jayapataksha Maharaj, where he mentioned that he would like to take all his disciples to the spiritual world in this lifetime itself. So they are all capable, they are all empowered living entities who have come to purify our existence in this material world. And one takes shelter of them and or takes to his instruction, our life becomes perfect. So there is a very nice quote in Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, which says, Nayam deho deha bhajam nuloke kashtam kaman arhate vid bhujam e tapo divyam putraka ena sattvam sudyed e yasmat brahma saukyam parantam. So Lord Rishabdeva, he is telling his sons, actually Rishabdeva goes to his forest. He rules the kingdom, and at the right time, he feels it's the right time to renounce his kingdom. So that is what is the example of detachment. So before leaving for the forest, he tells his sons, my dear boys, of all the living entities who have accepted material bodies in the world, one who has been awarded the human form of life should not work hard day and night. So he's telling his sons that one who has got this human form of life should not work very hard day and night for simply for sense gratification, which is available for dogs and hogs that eat stool. That means we see that dogs and hogs also go around struggling day and night for eating what? They eat stool. Similarly, he's instructing that one who has got this human form of life should not work very hard day and night. Now, one might think, how can I sustain without working day and night hard? We might see many examples of how there are people who work very hard day and night, but still they don't get what they aspire. But there may not be many who are there may be many who are not even working, but they are sitting at home and enjoying the luxuries because of their karma. So here it's a very vital instruction that human form of life is very, very important. Then he says that one should engage in penance and austerity to attain the divine position of devotional service. That means human form of life is awarded for one to observe penance and austerity, by which one can attain the position of devotional service. Then he says that by such activity, the heart is purified, and when one attains this position, he attains the eternal blissful life, which is transcendental to material happiness and which continues forever. So when one performs devotional service, one automatically reaches a position of transcendence, and he attains happiness, which is what everyone is aspiring for, but they don't realize. So I'll give some more quotes. In Chaitanya Bhagavat, there is a quote that Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti Yoga Gana, Bhakti Ei Krishna, Nama Smarana Krandana. It says that devotional service is the greatest treasure. And devotional service means crying while remembering Krishna's names. So that means there is no other treasure other than devotional service that one can possess. And when one has that devotional service, automatically he starts to cry when he thinks of Krishna's names. Another quote which says, the pure name of Krishna manifests when one cries while chanting the name of Krishna. Wealth and high birth are useless in one who does not worship Krishna. That means if one does not worship Krishna, all of one's wealth or even a high birth are useless. But one cries while chanting the name of Krishna, the pure name of Krishna manifests automatically in his heart. Another important one. If one has devotion, then everything is well. But without devotion, even the position of a king is inauspicious. That means there might be a king, but if he has no devotion to the Supreme Lord, even that is inauspicious. But if one has devotion, has no material possessions, then still everything is well. So the point is that if one more quote with that, I will sum it up. If one has wealth, fame, and material enjoyment, but is bereft of devotional service, then everything is inauspicious. One may have wealth, one may have fame, one may have material opulence also. But when he is bereft of devotional service, everything is inauspicious, because whatever wealth one has accumulated by proper means or improper means, nowadays it is not possible to accumulate wealth through proper means. Whatever one has acquired, material wealth, material fame, material enjoyment, one has to leave behind everything when one leaves this material world. One cannot carry these things into the next birth. Ultimately, like there was a quote from Srila Prabhupada, how a leading political leader had to take birth as a dog somewhere, because he might have had the biggest position, but then ultimately his karma was that he had to take a birth as an inferior human being. So the inferior form of species of life. The point is that when one has a lot of opulence, Queen Kunti in her prayers also says that opulence is the biggest hindrance to performance of devotional service. But if the same opulence is used in the service of the Lord, that opulence becomes perfect. So we see in these quotes also, if one has wealth, fame, everything, but if he is devoid of devotional service to the Lord, then everything is inauspicious. But if one has devotion to Krishna, then he is full of everything. There's one more quote which I found. If one is poor, that he has no food for a day, but he has devotion to Vishnu, he is the richest person. These are all quotes from Chaitanya Bhagavat. So if someone doesn't have a food for a day, but he has got devotion to Lord Krishna, then he is the richest person in this material world. So the ultimate point is that devotional service is the only way that one can connect himself to the Supreme Lord. And by performance of devotional service, one will automatically develop detachment, which is very vital for one to attain perfection in this material world. So devotional service is something like a fire. When one touches fire, it burns the fingers. Whether a rich person or a poor person, educated or illiterate, when he comes in contact with fire, he always tries to keep it away, his fingers, because the fingers will get burned. Similarly, when anyone comes in contact with the devotional service of the Lord, he becomes cleansed of all the sinful activities that he has committed in so many births, so many lifetimes, and so forth. So before I conclude the class, there's a very nice quote given by Simhadvacharya. It says, Lord Vishnu dwells in devotional service. He is controlled by devotional service. Only by devotional service does he give darshana to his devotees. And only by devotional service does he award liberation to the living entities. So everything that is there that can happen by performance of devotional service. And the Lord becomes controlled by performance of devotional service, and the Lord gives darshana to his devotees itself. How? In the form of the super soul, the Lord expands in the form of spiritual master. Spiritual master is nothing but an external manifestation of the Paramatma feature or the super soul present in one's heart. And then he says that, intense affection for Lord Vishnu is called devotional service, and this devotional service is the supreme method of achieving Lord Vishnu. That means if one wants to get Lord Vishnu or Krishna, one can do it only by the supreme method of process called devotional service. And without devotional service, one's chanting and austerities are meaningless. If one performs penance and austerities, but he has no devotion to the Lord, even whatever one does, whether chanting or austerities he takes, it's all meaningless. So the meaning is that devotional service is the greatest treasure, and it is the only means to remember Krishna's name in our lifetime. So with this, I conclude the class for the day. For the next 1 or 2 minutes, any of you can ask me some questions related to the subject matter, please.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Dandava Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Very enlightening class, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, like devotional
Thank you very much,
service.
Prabhu.
Yeah.
Yes, Prabhu.
Devotional service, how do we measure, like, because, we don't know what, actually, I don't know where do I stand up, like, how much I'm doing devotional service, how much is needed. This is a little confusions because, as you were saying that always like devotional service should be like always remembering Krishna and always, but it's not possible to always do that. So how do I take it, Prabhuji? Please, can I enlighten more?
Sure, Prabhu. Thank you very much. It was a very nice question. In the sense, we all perform devotional service, but somewhere something is lagging behind because, like I mentioned, that if we are not able to progress, we are not in a position to realize that even the super soul is there in our heart. We are not even in a position to realize that there is a soul within the heart, which is the living force within our body. Somewhere we might be having a bodily attachment. Like we see in this verse itself, Srila Prabhupada mentions the process of detachment. So are we detached from everything that is material? Now, detachment means not renouncing everything, but at the same time, looking at everything as an object by the Lord given for the pleasure of the Lord. So have we reached a stage where we are fully detached from this material world and performing devotional service exclusively for the pleasure of the Lord? Now, one thing is that there is no end to performing devotional service. There is no limit. So there is no way we can see or understand that, yes, I have become perfect. There is no state we can claim ourselves to be fully perfect in devotional service because we are like sadhakas. If we have been perfect in devotional service, now the process of sadhana bhakti is to reach a stage of raganuga bhakti. Raganuga bhakti means automatically developing the stage of love of Godhead. If we have not developed that love of Godhead, that means our sadhana itself, something is going wrong. Somewhere our sadhana needs to be corrected, which one has to correct through one's mentors or one's spiritual master, take guidance from the spiritual master. And it's a long process. So it's a constant process. There is never a stage where one does not have to be corrected. Sometimes it may take births also, but we must have that faith. Even we might see how many pure devotees are coming here. We very fact of their presence, we feel somewhere it makes a lot of difference in us. Why? Because they have perfected their devotional service and they may be liberated souls. So ultimately, we all have to reach that stage of liberation. Like I mentioned here also, pure devotees of the Lord, they may perform many material activities, but they are purely done for the pleasure of the Lord. So we should also start thinking, am I doing this service for the service of the Lord, or am I doing it for my own sense gratification? So these are things that one must try to normally try to consult in the association of devotees, senior devotees, spiritual masters, etc., and try to see who should be able to guide us in the best way possible. There is no common rule applicable for everybody. Every person is an individual. Everybody must have his own ways of doing things. So there should be always a senior superior who is in a position to guide us, and we should seek their guidance time and again as to how I can improve my devotional service. That is the only way to do.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, how do I know, like, is it whatever I'm doing practically is for the pleasure of the Lord? So how should I know that, Prabhuji?
How do I get to know that? It's
Whatever activities I do, is it for pleasure of the Lord?
Okay, for the pleasure of the Lord. Now, I don't know how you are situated, what your life is like. For example, I'm performing devotional service. Am I doing it for myself or doing for the service of the Lord? Many times we may be doing it thinking that I have a desire for something to achieve. So pure devotional service is unmotivated and also uninterrupted. So even if we may perform material activities, the way of looking at it is, are we thinking of the Lord all the time, even by performing these activities? So when we are surrendered fully to the Lord, then the Lord guides us at every moment of life. That is perfection. Even like I mentioned about the sun purifies even the stool and urine. So at that stage, even material activities get purified by the performance of our devotional service. So have we reached that sadhana, raga bhakti, or automatic love, stage of love of Godhead? If not, then definitely we have some internal desire which we are not able to know, or we are not able to understand our own self. So when we know that we are fully surrendered and everything is guided by within by the Lord, that means we have surrendered everything for the Lord, means we are doing everything for the Lord only. Have we surrendered fully? This is a question that we all have to ask. Can you say that you have given up everything to the Lord and every activity of yours on a daily basis is going on by the will of the Lord? I'm sorry to put a cross question, but I'm myself, I can't say I'm a surrendered soul. So it comes with the process. Surrender itself is not something that happens immediately, but when the Lord sees the desire, I think it's mentioned in the letter of devotion, when Lord sees the sincere desire of a person to surrender himself of all his possessions to the Supreme Lord, his position, his family, his name, fame, everything to the Lord, then the Lord definitely facilitates. Lord might take away one's job, Lord might take away one's family, so that one develops detachment from all these things. What happens is that our attachment to something or other always keeps happening. And we should see whether are we still having some attachment to something material in this world, in our profession, in our family life, even though we are performing devotional service. We have to introspect ourselves. And if not, then seek guidance from seniors.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu. I hope I've been able to answer your query, Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu. Just what the problem was, Prabhuji, because whatever the senses and mind demands, we do accordingly. Like,
Yes.
we don't know what it is for pleasure of Krishna or not, because it's very difficult to know whether it's we are definitely doing for pleasure of Krishna. And for example, suppose I just want to eat something, and I just offer it to Krishna and eat. It's that the mind demanded that I want to eat. It's not that Krishna
So
demanded. It's not Krishna's
that
pleasure.
means there is a material desire in us that is obstructing it.
Yes.
Yes.
That should
So
go
that
up.
means, yes, it should go up. That means we have not surrendered fully to the Lord.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes.
So thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments?
Prabhu, if I may ask a question, Prabhu, this is Uttam Damodar here. So
Yes,
does it mean that there is a possibility that we may not be able to go back home in the very lifetime? Is that a possibility? Despite
I'm not in a position to comment on that, but the thing is, Prabhupada has mentioned that one can go back to Godhead in this lifetime itself.
Yeah.
And this, my spiritual master also mentioned in one of his quotes, which I saw yesterday or day by yesterday. So it is possible, but then one has that desire, the Lord will definitely facilitate that also. But if one is bound by material attachment, the Lord will facilitate that also. Maybe he might give a position of a demigod in the next life. We don't know. What is the Lord's?
Okay.
So there are many demigods who achieve this position by performance of fruitive activities mixed with devotional service. So one may become a demigod also in the next life. And from there also, there are chances of going back to the spiritual world. But being in an opulent place, an opulent atmosphere, chances of taking up devotional service is difficult, as we see here also in this material world.
Okay. Got it, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments? Thank you all very much. Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki
jai.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Can I leave?
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Can I leave?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.